minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Much appreciated. Minister, I just want to review very quickly what we talked about yesterday about the fire sale of Hydro One, and then I have a specific question to ask you. So, back in the 2014 budget, you first announced the $130 billion infrastructure program, and at the time, it relied on a small amount of asset sales in addition to the General Motors shares of $1.1 billion. In the 2015 budget, the $130 billion asset sale, or the $130 billion infrastructure program was reintroduced almost verbatim, except this time it needed the sale of Hydro One shares to make that $130 million come true. You took the asset sales from $3.1 million and brought them up to $5.7 billion, I should say, up to $5.7 billion. It's the same $130 billion, but this time you've got those additional funds. Then we get to the 2016 budget, which confirms that you use that Hydro One revenue in general revenue, which has reduced the deficit. So you are directed to take the sale of Hydro One money and put it into the Trillium Trust. That's understood. The Trillium Trust, you brought a bill, Bill 144 out. November, was it? November 18th. You brought Bill 144. And it authorizes the expenditures for the Trillium Trust. And it says here on page 162, under authorized expenditures, that you can fund costs relating to the construction or acquisition of infrastructure. That's what you told us it would be for. You told us you would sell hydro and buy infrastructure. But the very next line is the one that gives you the opportunity to drastically change your method here. It also says that under authorized expenditures, you can reimburse the Crown for costs relating to construction or acquisition of infrastructure. So basically, you have announced infrastructure funds, you have sold an asset to ostensibly pay for them, you put the money in to pay for them, and then you take the money that was already budgeted and move it around and balance the budget, attempt to balance the budget. That's what we've seen you do here. That's understood now by virtually everyone in Ontario understands that. Can you state unequivocally that not $1 from the sale of Hydro One will help balance the budget?
So let's go through your line of thinking. In 2014, we introduced a budget that indicated that we would look at asset optimizations to be reinvested into infrastructure so that we can continue to do our work. And we cited $130 billion over that period of 10 years. Plus, we dedicated $29 billion of that to public transit and moving Ontario forward in the respective regions. A year goes by, and we get re-elected running on that platform to optimize our assets, which we highlighted very clearly in our platform. The next budget comes out, and we indicated which of those assets we had more certainty in terms of where we would proceed, and highlighted the fact that Hydro One would be one of them. And as we did that, we increased our commitment to moving Ontario forward from $29 billion to $31.5 billion, and cited the fact that we would now be investing more than $130 billion over the next 10 years. You got to remember, we have just moved a year. In the previous year, we probably would have about $11 billion were already invested into infrastructure. Now you got a rolling over of the next 10 years. So that part was taken. And then we moved on to the next budget, highlighting the fact that not only did we exceed our deficit targets without asset optimization. We have now gained even more value from the work that we've did that was going to be dedicated, the net proceeds dedicated to the Trillium Trust going forward. And we cited the fact that we estimate about $9 billion over that period of time from the repurposing of sale of the shares of Hydro One. $5 billion would be dedicated to repaying debt. The other $4 billion would be dedicated into the Trillium Trust. Additional monies would be invested into the Trillium Trust, being the GM shares, as already cited by the member, as well as other opportunities that we've cited in the budget of 2016 that will also be used.
So the question was, can you state unequivocally that not $1 from the sale of Hydro One will help balance the budget? And I'm just looking for that answer.
Also, the government is not relying on the asset sales to meet the commitments to balance our books. We have a $130 billion budget. We are not looking at assets. We are looking at the repurposing of assets to reinvest in new infrastructure, in new assets.
So as I mentioned in Bill 144, you put the loophole in there. There are many loopholes in the Trillium Trust Act where you may put a portion of the proceeds, even though we brought amendments trying to get you to change that to we must put all of the money. That was one of the loopholes, but the biggest loophole was the one I read in Bill 144, where you can reimburse the government. So my question to you is, can you state unequivocally that your deficit reductions this year did not use a single dollar from the sale of Hydro One?
So you're talking about Trillium Trust, which has been put in place to take all of the net proceeds of those assets to be dedicated to the reinvestment into new assets. And we've made it very clear that those net proceeds after we pay down debt would be invested into the Trillium Trust. So that will continue.
Chair, my question again is, can you state unequivocally that your deficit reductions this year that you announced did not use a single dollar from the sale of Hydro One?
I can state that the Government of Ontario is not relying on the repurposing of assets to pay down the deficit. We are relying on many factors to reduce our deficit: growing the economy, managing our spending, ensuring that we go after the underground economy. The steps that we have taken have actually surpassed our targets regardless of asset sales.
Well, that's not quite what the experts are saying. In the fall economic statement, in fact, I'm referring to the experts, some of them who are sitting in this room. On page 100 of the fall economic statement, your fall economic statement, you say that the province's total revenue production for 2015-16 of $125.6 billion is $1.2 billion higher than the 2015 budget forecast. This increase largely reflects the government's progress on its asset optimization strategy related to the recent Hydro One initial public offering. And in fact, back on page 99, you list 1.2, over $1 billion. It's of that 125.6 billion, you're talking about over $1 billion coming from the sale of Hydro One. How can you tell us that you didn't use or you're not using any of the revenue from Hydro One when on page 101, under other non-tax revenue, you've got $1 billion added there, which helped balance your deficit? How does that happen?
Madam Chair, we put forward our numbers illustrating what has transpired, and I'm telling you, we're not relying on assets to balance the books. We're relying on assets to be reinvested into areas where we can generate more income and borrow less as a result. In the meantime, we are growing our revenue, we are growing our GDP, we are controlling our net debt to GDP as a result, and we're surpassing all those expectations, Madam Chair.
I'm looking for a specific answer, and you know, the minister is saying one thing, but his own ministry is saying another. Maybe I'll read from the Financial Accountability Officer. Maybe that's the one that will make this work. When the Financial Accountability Officer submitted on October 15 end of October, early November, an assessment of the financial impact of the partial sale of Hydro One. He opened with the initial 15% sale of Hydro One would significantly reduce the province's deficit in 2015-16. So your book tells us that's what you did. The Financial Accountability Officer tells us that's what you did. How can you say that's not what you did? I don't understand how you come up with that number.
It seems to me that you don't understand, because we've highlighted specifically the trail of receipts and where we are reinvesting. I mean, that's evident for all to see. The Financial Accountability Officer also cited the sensitivities of the transaction that may occur, and you always cite the low end of his sensitivities. But the fact of the matter is, we've exceeded even that result.
Hang on,
all of which will be reinvested into the Trillium Trust to build new assets.
Look, it's either you or the Financial Accountability Officer who are correct. So he's telling us here that the sale of Hydro One would significantly reduce the province's deficit in 2015-16. Then your own document says the increase largely reflects the government's progress on its asset optimization strategy, and you show here that you've booked $1.090 billion in other non-tax revenue, the sale of Hydro One. How can you tell us that you're not relying on the sale of Hydro One to lower your deficit? We've gone through your own documents that outline how you did it. That's well understood now by virtually everybody who's writing about this. How can you sit there and tell us that's not what you're doing when we know that to be true?
So, Madam Chair, what we are relying on is the investments we make to grow the economy. We have a $130 billion budget growing to $135 billion, of which assets is not the issue of repayment. It's the issue of lessening our obligations on debt to be reinvested and, frankly, repurposing an asset that we feel can be better managed and enhanced. And that's exactly that's what has happened. We're taking those proceeds, we're taking assets that are unproductive, some real estate that could be used better, as well as passive shares like GM. We put them into the Trillium Trust, or we're going to continue putting more into that, which are the net proceeds of any gains that we have, which is what the member opposite is discussing, and reinvesting it. And it's the accounting of all of that is very well illustrated and shown. What's also interesting is he referenced the Trillium Trust and a number of initiatives that we put forward, and yet the very things that we've tried to put in place to substantiate a strong document and the amendments in the 144 that clarify our commitment to the Trillium Trust, he voted against.
Well,
so
of course
you can't do both. And what we are doing is ensuring that we have transparency and accountability in the funds. And as I said earlier, C.D. Howe Institute has very clearly illustrated that it's been transparent and prudent, and that we have been forthcoming in all the work that we've done.
Mr. Fedeli.
I was looking for an answer to that question and the question before. I've asked it several times now, and I've not got an answer yet. So let me restate in a different way and ask yet a different question of a similar nature. Quite simply, the deficit is getting smaller because of the sale of proceeds from Hydro One. In your own fall economic statement, you booked $1.9 billion into revenue from the Hydro One sale. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, page 100 reads, this increase is due to the asset optimization strategy. It tells the public, it tells everybody reading it that the number is lower because you've booked $1 billion from the sale of Hydro One. Will you admit that you're using money from Hydro One sale to balance the budget?
Well, I thank you for the question, because what you're asking about is our path to balance and what it is that we're doing to achieve that.
I'm asking about the Hydro One.
And I'm telling you what we are relying on. We're managing responsibly our spending.
Chair, that's
we are
not
controlling
what I'm
our spending
for.
In order to come to balance. We're transforming and modernizing government to enable us
Chair,
to get to the service.
Chair, that's not the question I asked.
No, you asked, how are you eliminating the deficit?
If he's not going to answer the question, I'm not going to let him carry on.
Madam Chair, he asked me how I'm eliminating the deficit.
No, I asked if you're using money from Hydro One.
One at a time, please. You asked a question. The minister is answering. You asked another question. Minister is answering. You may not get the answers you want. He's
but
filling
Chair,
up your airtime,
but
and
Chair,
we now have 5 minutes left.
But I'm asking a very specific question, and he wants to talk about some other fluff. I'm not interested in the fluff side. I've asked a very specific question, and if he's not going to answer that question, I'd like to move on to other questions and not have him chew up the time.
And that is always your option, Mr. Fedeli. Continue.
So I'd like to answer the question. Our path to balance includes a number of factors, and we do not rely on the repurposing of our assets to do so. We rely on ensuring that we manage effectively by controlling our spending, finding savings. We're modernizing and transforming the way we do government to provide for greater value. We're looking at the underground economy and tax compliance measures, which have given us $1 billion more last year, and we're investing strategically to grow the economy. Those have resulted in a balanced path, as well as increasing our revenues through the growth of our economy.
I will ask the Minister to wrap up. Mr. Fedeli, your next question.
Well, again, Chair, that is not what the Financial Accountability Officer told the Legislature. He told us in his opening page under essential points, the province's net debt, I'm quoting, the province's net debt would initially be reduced, but will eventually be higher than it would have been without the sale. What the Financial Accountability Officer has told the people of Ontario is that they are artificially lowering the deficit by using the sale of Hydro 1. He said that earlier. The sale of Hydro 1 would significantly reduce the province's deficit for 2015. If the Financial Accountability Officer can tell us that, I don't know why the Minister can't. So he has also said that the net debt would be initially reduced but will be higher. He said the long-term negative impact will be on the province because of this. So if the Minister won't answer the question that I've asked several times, maybe he'll answer this one. Can you please provide to the committee evidence, including a thorough breakdown of revenues and expenses, that you could balance the budget by 2017-18 without revenue from the sale of Hydro 1? That's the question that I have.
Yeah. So, Madam Chair, we indicated in the 2016 budget our path to balance, as well as our net debt to GDP ratio that would be peaking at this point and then tapering down because of the efforts that we've made. The member has just spoken about foregone revenue, which he knows all too well what it's about, because they've never taken that into consideration when they sold 100% of one of the most valuable assets.
So, Chair, I've asked for this thorough breakdown. Can I ask on the record?
Can I stop for a second? The member, Mr. Fedeli, has asked a question. I would ask the Minister to address the question.
Yes, Madam Chair.
He asked for specific
So the question is our net debt to GDP ratio, our ability to achieve it and taper it down, which we said we have. We have broken down the elements of how we're achieving that in the 2016 budget.
I'm asking for a thorough breakdown. I'd like him to be able to either provide it here now or have it sent to the clerk.
Just to let you know, Mr. Fedeli, you have under 2 minutes.
Yeah,
right now.
so that's what I'm asking.
I'm asking. Will the Minister provide this information?
And I can provide the member that our growth and our GDP, which is what's enabling us to enable us to have a improved net debt to
understood
GDP.
the question.
You have time just to repeat the question.
Can you please provide to this committee, in writing submitted to the committee, the evidence, including a thorough breakdown of revenues and expenses, that you could balance the budget by 2017-18 without revenue from the sale of Hydro 1? That's what we're asking be submitted to the committee.
And Madam Chair, the numbers are there to be seen. We have it in the 2016 budget. It'll come out in the public accounts in short order as well. And we've clearly laid out
that's the fall. The public accounts are September. I'm asking for it now, Chair.
Okay. What I've directed is research will attempt to find that information and provide it to the member. Thank you.
It's there.
So, to rephrase, research is keeping track of the questions, and it is up to the Ministry to provide the information to the member. You've got 30 seconds, Mr. Fedeli.
Well, earlier, it's obvious I'm not going to get any questions about Hydro 1 answered. It's obvious that we've touched a point. We're going to rely on the Financial Accountability Officer. He was forthcoming with the fact that, indeed, Hydro One will reduce the province's deficit. So at least we have the answer from the office, or I was hoping to have the answer from the government. I would have thought when the minister in his opening...
And your time is up, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
Thank you,
That's
Mr.
good.
Fedeli. We now move to Ms. French.